Hello, everyone. I am Hailey Kanigan. My friend and colleague Lauren Gaudet joins us today to do a discussion around the different aspects of counseling in terms of the different professionals that are available for a client to access, such as counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists. We also deep dive into the cycle of change and what that means for a client in terms of what they would be provided in a consult call and a therapy session. So we look forward to having a great conversation and welcoming you today. Good morning, Lauren. How's it going?
It's going well, Haley. How are you today?
Good, thank you. I'd love for you to take a moment just to introduce yourself, like your profession, and a little bit about what you do for your practice.
Absolutely. My name is Lauren. Pronouns are they, she. I am a registered social worker and a counselor. I've been in practice for the last 6 years, supporting adults of all ages and a lot of young professionals, a lot of folks in the LGBTQ2S plus community. And yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I know that we kind of had some ideas back and forth on what we kind of want to take the time today to discuss. And so I'd love to just get right into it. So we were kind of discussing like having this podcast be a medium for having like a new client come to counseling or some information around the different types of professions within the field of counseling. So, for example, Lauren, say a client comes to you, they're starting to discuss what they're experiencing, and you're noticing that they may need like some more care outside of your scope of practice and your education level. What would you say? Would you recommend a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Depends on the person and what they're going through. So, what I always emphasize to folks I'm talking to, whether it's with students, my colleagues, clients themselves, context is everything. And so, it really depends on that particular person's needs, and definitely having a discussion of like, okay, let's talk about what's happened to you, what's happening for you, so both that past and present context, and giving this client, empowering them with as much information as I have possible, or linking them to those correct resources to say, okay, here's your choice of, seeking a psychologist's services versus a psychiatrist. Now, the only time where counselors would kind of bypass empowering a client would be in like crisis situations where there's imminent risk of harm. And usually that involves a referral to the hospital, really meaning calling emergency services. And then that's where a psychiatrist would definitely be in the picture. And sometimes there's psychologists that are on those interdisciplinary teams as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to note. Like you're saying, it just really depends on the context and what's happening. Would you also say that one of the main differences between a psychologist and a psychiatrist is a psychiatrist is able to prescribe medication?
Mhm. Yes, I think that's a very important distinction. And so it's so important to have a medical team, right? Like you've got your therapist on your team and like who else is there, right? That's coming alongside you to have that supportive and collaborative care. One of the reasons why I start therapy is that anybody can benefit. Mental health and mental wellness is just as valid as physical health and physical wellness. Right. And so sometimes medication is indicated, and it's so important to be speaking with your general practitioner or your psychiatrist to talk about that option if that's what makes the most sense for you.
Definitely, for sure. I think that's really highlighting great point is I think one of the things we really wanted to discuss today was like what are the other benefits of counseling and like why is it worthwhile and what type of service providers are there? What will be the best one for you as a client?
Hmm. Absolutely. So, what's your why?
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't like fully have that why, and that's 100% okay. And so you'll come to notice as you're looking for a therapist, like some therapists are quite specialized and specific. They might put out there, you kind of have an idea of what you want and you're committed. Other therapists are like, just come as you are. We'll figure it out together. Sometimes people are like, I just feel crappy. I don't feel good. I just want to feel better. So that's what does that mean? Right. And so it's really about meeting that client where they're at. Okay, so tell me a little bit more. Is it like, are you feeling kind of down? Are you feeling anxious and stressed? Let's start to label your experience so that we can collectively work together to figure out what are the next steps.
Definitely. So before that, even that first session, what are your thoughts and opinions on a consult call?
I love consults. There's different opinions for sure. Personally, in my practice, I do provide a free 15-minute phone consultation. Now, Future clients out there, important to know, some therapists will offer free consultations anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. Other therapists don't do consultations and they do expect you to pay for a first session. And so just be aware of what your options are. In my practice, I do offer 15 minutes, and not only does that give the client the opportunity to interview me, hear how my practice is, and like even the practical matter of like, do you like my voice? No, I've joked with you before, Hailey. If you don't like my voice, it's going to be really hard to work with me. And so just be real with how you feel. Goodness of fit is everything with a counselor. Like
Everything.
maybe I could be the best in the world in a particular subject matter, but if it's like Lauren's voice is so dang irritating, I'm not going to be that effective for you. So really empowering the client, ask questions. You have the right to ask questions. Maybe we could elaborate a little bit more on that. Figure out, does this therapist, do they kind of get me? Do I feel heard by them? Do I feel comfortable? Now, a lot of people, especially starting new, it's not comfortable, and that's normal. Really want to validate that. But it's like, you seem okay enough, because I really, truly believe that therapists earn their clients' trust. So clients know that you don't go to therapy and your client, or excuse me, your therapist needs to earn your trust, right? And so they're going to meet you right where you're at. So that first phone call, it's really figuring out, hey, what's going on for you? What are you hoping to get out of this? So I'll usually ask, what's bringing you to therapy? What are some of your current concerns? What are you hoping to get out of this? And some people are very distinct. They're like, I have a colleague and I'm struggling to communicate with them. I'd like to learn some more boundaries and how to be assertive. Super. Other people like, I feel awful and I don't know what's going on and I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And both are totally okay. And so it's kind of figuring out, all right, where are you at right now and where might we be able to go with this? And so it gives me the opportunity to explain, here's how I work. Here's some of the modalities that I draw from. So that's the tools and approaches in therapy for this particular client. How does that sound to you? Might that be helpful for you? Really empowering that person to make choices. And it also gives me as a therapist the opportunity to understand this person better. Do I have the competence and the skill base to help somebody? And that's ethical practice. Is this person's presentation or concerns outside of my scope of practice? And if that's the case, then I do provide referral sources. And again, asking that client, saying, would it be helpful? So it's always about giving the client as much choice as possible, because sometimes they'll be like, oh, you can't help me. Well, maybe they have feelings about that. If all feelings are valid there, but they don't want a referral. They're like, no, I'd rather go check out other sources myself, or I'm already talking to other people, or I need to step back and then maybe try finding another therapist another time. And so knowing that all of those options are okay, knowing that all of those options are available to them.
Definitely. I think you highlighted a bit of like that informed consent, right? The client saying, this is what I'm looking for, or I'm not really sure what I'm looking for. And that's the therapist's job to go, this is what I can offer. This is an area of competency. Does this sound like a good fit for you? If not, let me do an ethical responsibility to you. Even though we haven't actually started working together, would you like a referral? Could I direct you another way? Like, did you know there's this resource to check out other counselors?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so great to have like a community of care. Like it's so wonderful. I know if I interview a client and maybe I'm full. That's another practical thing.
Mhm.
Does this therapist have availability that fits your schedule?
Definitely.
And do you have like coverage, or are you able to pay for the fees that they are charging? And it's nice to have that community of care, because maybe I have a 1 month wait list. Maybe you have a couple opening spots and I can say, hey, check out my dear friend and colleague, Hailey. I think that she could be a really great fit for you. And, I'm all about community care, but ultimately it is that the client's decision, right? Do you want to have that referral or resource or not? And that's, both of them are totally okay.
So much goes into that 10-15 minute consult call, right? Like there's a lot of different moving pieces. And you're also, wouldn't you say, like almost like gently stepping through that conversation, because you're like, this is the first time I'm meeting this person, right? This is the first time they're hearing my voice. We don't really have that rapport yet. So maybe I can't throw in a joke too soon, right? And so you're trying to really feel them out. Do you find that there's a difference in clients who are presenting for a consult call if they've had previous like therapy or self-discovery work prior to not having any? Like, do you feel like those calls go differently?
I would say a little bit, yes, because there is a knowing, there is an experience that they've had prior, and like, well, I've been to counseling before, and this is kind of what it went through, and that's like, a great cue there. Like, right, that's another question I usually ask. Have you been to counseling before? What was that experience like? What was helpful or not helpful for you? Because that can help me sort of figure out where do we start together as well. And of course, if somebody is comfortable sharing those experiences, I would say though, like, there's not a huge difference besides just the like, oh yeah, I kind of know what it's about. Maybe that's the biggest difference that I'm noticing is they're like, I don't really know what's going on. And so at the beginning of the phone call, I said, at any point you have questions, feel free to interrupt or interject at any time, and happy to ask those as they come up. Or if you want to listen a little bit more and ask after, that's okay. And oftentimes too, in these, I guess you could even call it a discovery call of sorts as well, sometimes it's a little nerve wracking, and that's totally normal. They're, hey, I'm talking to a stranger, I'm being vulnerable and opening up a little bit and seeking services. And I always give them the option as well. If questions come up after our call, feel free to email me anytime and I'll get back to you. And so, yeah, just keeping those communication gateways open.
Definitely. It sounds like you're very much like motivated on ensuring that the client is well informed on what counseling would look like with you and specifically in your practice or kind of those general things. Cause a lot of times I find as well, like with a client that hasn't had counseling before in that consult call, you can hear that bit of hesitation in their voices and they're like, so what does that hour actually look like? And I'm like, well, I do not necessarily have you lie down on a couch. If you want to lie down in a couch in your own home over on a video call, you're more than welcome. But just like kind of ironing out a few different things. And they're like, well, what if I'm feeling something, but I don't know what I'm feeling? Well, I'm like, that's where I step in, right? Or they're like, what if I don't know what to say? I'm like, that's okay. That's where I can support you with that. So I kind of think like part of that is just decreasing a bit of their angst or fear going into the maybe their first session.
Absolutely. Really emphasizing that you're co creating a space together, a collaborative space. Like, I'm here to offer you my expertise and everything that I know. I'm going to give that to you and help you with that. But ultimately, it's you who's in that driver's seat, or you're the one who's taking the lead in some kind of way. And we're walking alongside to facilitate you finding your own answers. And so it's this really beautiful combination of like, here's some cool tools or coping strategies that I have from my education. Let's try it together. What was your experience of that? What was that like for you? What did you notice on the inside? We talk about the internal world, and then we also place it within context of the external world. Who's around you? Who are your people? Who are your communities? What is society like for you? Really thinking of Kimberly Crenshaw's um, talk about intersectionality, right? Really looking at the complexities of being a human being, what all those identity factors and how they intersect within the society that we work and live and play in, right?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. And I think you like had a really good point when you're like co-create, right? But I think that also begs the discussion of maybe the cycle of change. Because in many, like, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the cycle of change, but maybe you can kind of give a description of the cycle of change and we can kind of see why that co-creation is really similar in many ways to the cycle of change.
Absolutely. So the cycle of change or stages of change, those are two common titles for what we're going to talk about. There's kind of six main stages that folks talk about. So maybe I'll just list those and then we can expand on it a little bit more. So we've got the pre-contemplation, we have contemplation, we have preparation, action, maintenance, and then some folks will call it relapse or going backwards. And it's one of my favorite ones to talk about because there's a lot of really important things to emphasize. So perhaps we could start at the beginning, Hailey.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what's your experience? Like, how do you recognize if a client is maybe in that stage?
So often I'm seeing like just a lot of not being fully aware or maybe a total unawareness. Like, some people will label that as ignorance or denial. And sometimes ignorance or denial exists, but I find languaging to be important. And so most people, it's like they're just unaware. So maybe I'm showing up a particular way in my romantic relationship and I'm really frustrating my partner, but I'm just totally unaware of it. And they're like, you're kind of snarky and mean. I don't like that. And so maybe before I'm pre-contemplation, I don't realize like I'm communicating in a way that's unhelpful and maybe unhealthy or problematic. And I'm ignorant to that fact,
Mhm.
or maybe there's a part of me that's in denial. I'm like, no, I'm not. what are you talking about, right? I think we all know people who have denied behavior at some point. I mean, as humans, like it's a human thing that happens.
Mm.
So of course there's a whole spectrum of, some people are constantly in denial, but topic for another day again.
I think that's where like that saying ignorance is bliss comes from, because until when we're unaware of what's actually happening, we can kind of be in that blissful state where we don't necessarily have that accountability, or we aren't really aware of what our choices are. And that can be in discomfort because maybe there's issues that are arising, but it's also blissful because it doesn't force us then to look inward. And sometimes looking inward can be really uncomfortable.
Totally, totally. They talk about that series of like ovals or circles of the growth zone, the comfort zone into the growth zone, and the stages of that as well. So yeah, pre-contemplation, it's like kind of this unawareness. You're not really consciously aware of something. And so maybe somebody points something out, the example of maybe my romantic partner is like, oh hey, this, you're acting some kind of way. So it's like, maybe that cues me, or I have an awakening. Maybe for whatever reason, who knows, there can be almost infinite possibilities of coming to a realization of noticing something within myself that's like, oh, okay, now I have more of a conscious awareness of whatever that thing is. And we can see people moving into the contemplation stage of maybe having some mixed feelings. So maybe with this example of like, oh, I'm being a little mean or snarky, it's like, oh, maybe I am. And maybe there's part of me that's like, well, whatever. And I don't really want to address it. Part of me that's like, but it's true. And I kind of do want to address it. And so you can often see this back and forth of, well, what do I want to do about this? And there's helpful questions to ask, and your therapist will help you with this too, right? Like, where are you at right now? It's meeting you where you're at. That's number one. And like, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings about this? What do you think should happen? Right. And what are the pros and cons to inviting change, or if you even want to change something? Because sometimes it's like, what, I just became aware of something and naming it is all I wanted to do. And that's fine.
Totally. And I think that's where it brings up, I often see like clinicians intake forms. They're like, do you understand by engaging in counseling, there could be change?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
really like that statement because it really highlights that like there could be, it's up to the client how far they want to go with it. Like you're saying, whether they just want to name it or not, but there could be more change outside of that in the way that maybe they live their day-to-day lifestyle, or the different institutions that are playing in their lifestyle, or the different relationships they have and how those might change, for sure.
Absolutely. Back to that informed consent. So important. And I love that that's like coming up in our conversation today, because it's absolutely integral to the work. And it is important to emphasize, because I think that there are a lot of impacts that, again, kind of bringing things to like conscious awareness that folks aren't really aware of. They're like, oh, my relationships might change, whether it's at work or it's with my family or my friends or even with myself. And, kind of preparing folks to be aware of that, right? It's almost like, I think, like primer, right? We're priming. It's like, oh, this could be a thing, so let's notice that and be aware, right?
And wouldn't you like, for me, I think in the next stage of contemplation, that's like one of my favorite stages, to be honest, because I have a little bit of a competitive nature, if I may be honest. I feel like this is a great chance for me to hook that client and go, there can be more relief or peace from what you're experiencing. And like, I love being that guiding light or that little bit of hope. Would you say like that contemplation phase is like a nice place to be in some ways with a client, because you can really see the trajectory of possibly moving forward in a helpful way?
Absolutely. And I think what is like, and I had some feels there. I was like, yes. Even my heart felt that, like, there can be peace and relief, because there absolutely can. And for us, it's a lot easier to see, like, being the outside looking in and being therapists, like we see people's journeys to healing and wellness all the time. And so offering that gift of possibility is wonderful. I also really enjoy the fact that it's like, we don't have to move into preparation, and to empower that person to have those choices and to continually emphasize, we're just going to be where you're at right now and that's okay. I think is also really powerful. And it's those moments too when that starts to sink in for clients. They're like, I have choice, I have options, and usually there's a shift in towards like moving into that preparation and action. And maybe we could hop into what preparation looks like. It is kind of figuring out like, what's the how.
Yeah, like I think of preparation as maybe making a schedule, for like just a common example, or maybe looking at different therapists, if we're using like that idea of which therapist want to choose with which professional distinction, right? That would be like checking them out, maybe seeing my options. Maybe that might be booking a consult call, but maybe not like that first full session.
Hmm. Absolutely. And maybe you have moved into sessions together and you are ready to start to prepare. And like even there's first time clients too. Like a lot of them will come already like they're prepared. Like I feel depressed. I have no motivation. I'm tired and I don't want to feel this way anymore. How do I work through this? And so you kind of already are in that preparation phase in a way too. Like they've thought about it, they're aware, they have some ideas of how they want to move forward. And I always kind of emphasize, when we're figuring out how to cope with something, there's sort of three main things. It's being with it. Sometimes life is hard and cruel and challenging and devastating, and it is what it is. How do you be with that? Increasing your ability to tolerate. We talk about the window of tolerance. I think you had mentioned that in your prior podcast, Hailey, right? Where we look at I always like putting a heart rate monitor in mine, our good and bad days, our neutral times. That's what it means to be alive. And as long as we're within our window, it's manageable. Right. And so, how do we increase our window to cope and be with our experiences? Or how do we contain it? Or how do we soothe something? So we kind of have these three main options, and usually it's sort of a layered combination of all three to navigate what it means to be alive and have feelings and thoughts and sensations and to behave or show up in a particular way.
Definitely. I really think like what you're saying, I like to summarize in three main options of like either you change, you cope, or you accept. Right? Like those really that summarization of all those different aspects. And like that's the only way to be in life in reality, right? Like you're saying, like how do you tolerate, how do you soothe, how do you manage, how do you maybe move forward, all of those different things. But as we move forward out of the preparation, we go into action.
Absolutely. Yep. So that's where you're starting to practice the tools and the coping strategies, or simply being. For a lot of people, it's really hard to feel because often in our society, we're kind of disconnected, right? I'm thinking and thoughts, and I'm always in my head, and contain the train, as one of my dear former students and friends said. How do you contain the train? And it's starting to slow right down. And I always say to my clients, going slower is faster. We're really, and like you said too, Hailey, like I will help you name those emotions. I'll help you connect with those sensations. And so I'm always trying to find what is like the micro baby sliver step that we can take to start to build that foundation of well-being for somebody.
Definitely, for sure. And I always say to people, like the reason why feelings it's spelled with FEEL is because we have to feel our feelings for it to actually make sense, and we cannot resist, otherwise it will persist, right? So I love our little rhyming tricks to kind of make it a little more approachable and understandable for clients, like why we're doing what we're doing.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that little rhyme. It's so
Yeah.
awesome.
And then after the action phase, like the coping skills are happening, we're making some movement, we're going into maintenance.
Hmm. Yes, and always like emphasizing this is not a linear process. Typically, like you're not literally, I don't even know if that's a word, like in a straight line moving from phase to phase, right? It's like we're usually bouncing back and forth. Or a lot of folks, I'm sure, have seen that imagery where you're in your line of like heading towards your goal, and there's this big tangled scribble. Maybe you're coming back a bit, and then you're in the scribble, and then you're over here at your endpoint, whatever that looks like. And it needs to be normalized and talked about often, right? Because a lot of times clients are like, I feel like, and this kind of is tying into like basics, or like where it feels like I'm failing, I'm going backwards, I'm relapsing, whatever kind of languaging clients want to use with that. And it's again really normalizing that this is not a linear process, and that you truly can't go backwards in a way, right? And I don't know who the original author was of this, but it's like you are not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience.
I love that. That's so valuable because many times clients, when they're doing well and then they find that they're not feeling as well in the future, they're like, wow, I'm back at square one. I'm like, well, no, like, are you the same person like so many months ago? Like, you're taking so much more experience and knowledge and like so much understanding of like who you are and what you need and your recipe for wellness.
Exactly. One of
Mhm.
my favorite sessions to do with short and long term clients is to do a tools list review. So every single session, I'm creating a master list at the top of somebody's chart, but I'm also inviting all of my clients, like, you need to keep a master list too of every single coping strategy, tool, or positive change that has happened for you, so that when you are in those times of heightened emotional challenge, or in the feeling some kind of way, right, that you can come back to this list. The tools are always going to be there, right? And oftentimes it's like, oh, well, I haven't used my container. Oh, I kind of forgot about that one. Well, hey, how cool that you can come back to it. It's like mindfulness, right? You can always come back. There's no doing it right or wrong. There's no wrong way of doing therapy.
Right. Definitely. Because our minds, like in reality, time is not necessarily so linear, right? Like our weeks, our brains put time on a chronological way so that we can understand the experience of life. And so therefore that gets caught up with our idea of wellness. Am I either well or not, instead of just like that continuation of journey, right? Continuation of experience.
And really challenging, or maybe not quite challenging, yeah, but being curious. What does that mean to be well? What does that mean to be well to you? And
Definitely.
can we expand on the connotation or the definition of that? 'Cause often people are like, well, that means being happy all the time.
Yeah.
And, there's a conversation to be had about that, or to never feel sad, or to not be enraged. Like, I love talking about righteous rage, right? And so it's again looking at like healthy emotions and the spectrum of emotions of feeling, and that we are meant to have those ups and downs and those calm times, or neutral or boring, what have you, right? And just learning, like,
Definitely.
keeping it within my window. Wow, it was a really awful day, but I'm gonna be okay tomorrow. Or maybe
Mhm.
I'm not okay for a few days, but that's literally okay not to be okay. Or I'm so
Definitely.
angry at that injustice. Good. That's healthy, right? I think it's really normalizing healthy responses. Like, we're kind of caught up in a lot of toxic positivity in our society of like high vibes only, and
Yeah.
to always feeling a particular way, and it's kind of problematic. And yeah, I think it's important dialogue to have with the people who we're supporting.
Yeah, I think you highlight a really good point with that toxic positivity. Often in our society, it's like, oh, you're having a bad day, but you have a home. So you shouldn't not be unhappy, right? And so it's so important for as clinicians to normalize emotional responses and normalize the idea that unhappy or uncomfortable emotions are valuable. It's just giving you information. It's giving you an experience. Like if we were happy all the time, it would be boring too.
You would know nothing else, right? It's like you have to have both ends of the spectrum to recognize both ends of the spectrum.
Mhm. And that even that, like when we are actually in that peaceful place with the client, I find a client comes, goes, I'm doing really well today. I'm not really sure what I want to work on today. I'm like, great. This is a great space. Like one of my favorite strategies to do with clients if they're feeling really well is, can you write a letter to your future self when you were unwell? Because I hate to break it to you, you will be feeling not well possibly again in the future. And so, wouldn't it be nice with the clarity that you have today to be able to move forward and know that you could look back on this letter of someone that you trust yourself to say that this experience will not always last when you're feeling unwell?
What a beautiful exercise. And do you find
Mhm.
your clients respond really well to doing that, and when they're coming to session feeling really good?
Yeah, they actually do because I find that they really connect with that idea because many times when you're feeling unwell and someone's like, it's going to be okay, they're like, I don't believe you. I don't believe that person. But they kind of like to believe themselves in a way because they know that they intentionally did that and they know that they have that letter to read in the future and they don't always remember exactly what they wrote. So it can be a really nice place of familiarity.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful way to like strengthen internal resources, right? You're like, that came from within you. What do you think about that? Do you remember feeling that way? And sometimes when people are in distress, like they can't really connect to the feeling part of that way. But when they have that concrete piece of paper and they're looking at it in their own handwriting, that's really powerful.
Definitely. And I think that kind of leads us into the last phase, like not linear, but of possibly called relapse or going backwards. What are your opinions on that phase?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess you could say like relapse or failure exists, like absolutely, sure. And again, it's kind of how you're framing it, or how you're looking at that. Like, I mean, we all learn, we all fail as humans in some kind of way, but they're learning opportunities, right? And I think what's more important is not getting stuck in, oh, I failed. It's like, okay, so that happened, but what now? Like, what are you gonna do about it? And like one of the tools I like to talk about is called what not why. Now, there's obviously utility, and it's very helpful to look into the why, or what's at the root or the core, or what's the explanation of a particular behavior or an event. But sometimes it's really practical to just be like, okay, what happened? So maybe somebody, let's take the example, I want to do a gratitude journal. This week, I'm going to write 2 things a day. And, oh, I haven't done that for the last 2 weeks. Now I feel like I'm going backwards, and I'm not committing to the things I said I was going to do. And so it's like, okay, well, what happened? You didn't do it. What are you going to do about it? You can restart, right? Like, you can restart. And again, oh, sorry, go ahead, Hailey.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was like, I don't even know if I like the word restart, because we were saying before, which was so beautiful, is that idea of experience, right? Like, is it really restarting? Is it just like taking like a sidestep and now trying to go forward from that pathway?
Yeah, I think you can definitely describe it that way, right? Like, keep going. So you paused. Yeah, I think it's kind of more, here's a pause. So maybe we're going this way a little bit, but that's okay. I think a lot of things too, like, and obviously there's so many examples of like relapse and failure, and we're not talking anything like with addictions, or um, maybe with a particular behavior that's like quite severe or problematic, or we're kind of just talking about general things. But even with homework, like, a lot of clients will say, I didn't do the homework, I feel bad about it. And seeing that is kind of a step back in a way, and I kind of celebrate it, and they look at me like I'm backwards. They're like, what are you talking about? I didn't do the thing, I didn't check the box. And it's like, that's okay, because it's just as informative. We would get information from you doing the exercise, and we say, well, what was that tool like? Or what was that strategy? What came up for you? You not doing, we literally ask the same questions. Okay, what was going on this week? Oh, wow, that sounds really stressful. Right? Or you had a lot on your plate. And, like, I support students in post secondary institutions. And so one of my clients was like, oh, I was studying for midterms, I didn't do the tool. I said, that's great. I would way rather hear you studying about your midterms than saying, oh, I practiced this tool a week and neglected. Right? And so it's kind of normalizing a prioritization, right? And what was going on for you that it didn't happen? And that gives so much insight as well. Not only, I'm kind of talking about external experiences here, but internally, maybe there was a part of you or there was this sense like, oh, I just can't go there. So let's get curious about that. And that's extremely helpful. And when people feel like they're going backwards or they're stuck, maybe you did take a step back, whatever that means to you, or maybe you are stuck, but that's such a window of opportunity to become curious, like, what is contributing to this? There's so much to learn there. And I think when you explain that to folks, it provides some relief or some space to be like, oh, okay, this isn't, I think stuck equals bad. It's kind of often what happens. Stuck is bad. It's like, actually, it's not. There's something to learn here. Let's get curious about that.
Definitely. And like, I really like how you say we learn a lot of information when a client does not do their homework, like what was going on, like what were they experiencing. And I feel like I've almost done a client injustice with my natural need, my own natural ingrained need to help clients move forward, that they feel like if they haven't done their homework, that then that's not good. Right. So that's a good also check in for me to have my awareness over that, to go, hey, like I make sure that the client knows that I'm on their team no matter what. Do the
Mhm.
homework, don't do the homework. I'm with you.
Absolutely. And how powerful is that to know how you're showing up into the therapeutic space as well? Now, there'll be times where I'm like, oh, that didn't sound quite right. Like, I'll do like the time out, like, give me a moment here. Let me rephrase that. And I think that's such a great way to build rapport. And for the clients who are listening, if you have a therapist who's not quite hearing you, or they're not quite getting something that you need them to know, like, you always have the right to say, like, oh, I'm not really sure about this, or can we talk about that? And I know that can be kind of scary to bring things up with your counselor if you feel like they haven't heard you correctly, or there's a tool just isn't resonating. But I think it's really important to affirm to clients, like, you have the right to say, you know what, this tool just doesn't, it's just not doing it for me. Let's try something else.
Yeah, definitely. I almost want to whisper this, but clients, we work for you. Just in case you weren't aware of that, we work for you, and our goal is to be most effective and helpful for you. So please give us that feedback. Please let us know what's working, what's not working, where you'd like to go with things. If you want to change direction, like we're malleable, we're flexible. We're just our goal and our passion within our careers is just to be helpful.
Absolutely. Like, I have so much gratitude that the folks that I'm able to support have allowed me into their lives, and however that looks like in our space. And I think we're very privileged to do the work that we do. And we will do our very best to check in. How's this working for you? How's this going? But sometimes we might miss something. And so really appreciate what you've just said, Hailey, about, letting us know too. we're communicating back and forth as two beings.
Yeah, wonderful. I think we did a really great job of kind of summarizing the different stages of the linear of the cycle of change and how it's not linear and the different components that are in there. I would like to also highlight this idea that one of our main strategies as clinicians to help a client move forward through those stages is like motivational interviewing. So, do you have an example maybe of motivational interviewing or a question that you might use?
To be honest, I have no training in motivational interviewing and little knowledge. So here's a great example where know your scope of practice, right? Your therapist should know. And yeah, motivational interviewing is not a modality that I've actually had any experience in. Have you had some, Haley?
A little bit, but I would just say even like those types of questions like, oh, like what would change look like for you in the future? Or like statements like, do you feel like change could be possible for you? And what would that look like? And could you have another opportunity with this if this was different? Or did you know that you can take things slowly and that it isn't going to be abrupt, drastic, unhelpful change as you move through the different pieces of your life and through counseling or self-development? So I just wanted to highlight that as well, because sometimes clients are like, well, what if I'm stuck in like pre-contemplation? Like, what could a therapist do for me? It's like, well, not like we've already highlighted meeting the client where they're at, but we may also have some questions that are a little bit like a little bit hints of insinuation behind them, like, oh, there is change available for you if you're open.
Absolutely. I so appreciate that. You're almost like offering a hand if somebody is like willing to take it, or shining the flashlight or whatever kind of imagery you want to use, throwing the rope down into the pit, or a ladder coming down from that stress zone.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And again, back to languaging, that's really important, right? Like you're naming it motivational interviewing. I'm thinking modality. I don't have that training, but those kinds of questions are definitely ones that therapists use.
for sure. And I definitely know they're ones that you use too. And I think that as counselors, like we can get very caught up on, are we saying things the right way? Are we using the right titles? Do we know everything that we need to know? But that's like, we even circle back to the beginning of our conversation. That's why that consult call usually happens in the first place, that we can give those expertise that is maybe needed for the clients, or if not, if it's not available too. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to touch on today, Lauren?
I just wanted to give a shout out to a client that I had last week who gave me permission to share what they said about counseling, and that the purpose of counseling is continued learning and continued perspective. And I thought that that was just so beautiful, because that is exactly what counseling is about. Come as you are, let's be together, let's figure it out. Maybe it's just being, maybe it is figuring out, okay, we're gonna move from one stage to the next if that's what you're needing. And really appreciate your emphasis on that we also act as guides. Like as much as we are, you're the leader, we're following you and supporting, sometimes we do take that step ahead to guide the client in a particular direction in a way that's offering lots of those options. Here's some options where you want to go.
That's such a wonderful statement that that client made. And that sounds like that came from a lot of experience probably that they had with you as their client and your working relationship. So that's really wonderful.
Really just got a shout out to all the clients. There's so much wisdom within everybody. And that's what's
Definitely.
so cool about our job, is that we are helping folks bring out their own wisdom. That is our job. To find the
Mhm.
answers within yourself.
Definitely. Well, I really appreciate all of the wisdom that you share with us today, Lauren. If clients wanted to reach out, like, are you accepting new clients and where can they find you?
So you can find me at phronesiscounseling.com, and I'm sure there will be links with the spelling and everything. I am taking new clients, but there is a little bit of a wait list depending on the schedule. I do have a few openings, but would definitely encourage folks look at the times and see if I'm available. If not, I have a community network of folks that I'd be happy to refer to. So always encouraging individuals to reach out, even just for more information, for resources. To do a consult, maybe if you want to be on the wait list, or if an appointment comes up, then it'd be great to meet new people as well.
For sure. Wonderful. Awesome. And I just want to say, Lauren, I really commend you and I really appreciate our friendship and our colleague network that we have within each other. Like I've always learned such wonderful things from you. So appreciate taking the time today.
Oh, thank you so much, Haley, and vice versa. I really appreciate your time today as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much.